Here's what nobody saw coming. While you were sleeping last night, the American economy just took a hit that's going to cost billions. And I'm not talking about some abstract market movement or a stock dip that'll recover by lunchtime. I'm talking about cold, hard cash walking out the door. American businesses watching their customer base vanish overnight. And the wildest part, it's all self-inflicted. Let me paint you a picture. Right now, as I'm recording this, there are hotel owners in Montana staring at empty parking lots, restaurant managers in Maine looking at vacant tables during what should be peak season, ski resort operators in Vermont watching their bookings crater. What do they all have in common? They're hemorrhaging money because their biggest customers just stopped showing up. Canadians, the single largest group of international visitors to the United States, gone. And then this happened. South Korean automakers just got slammed with tariff threats that sent their stock prices into free fall. Major manufacturing operations that employ thousands of Americans, they're now looking at their spreadsheets wondering if it's worth staying in the US market at all. But here's where it gets complicated. This isn't happening in a vacuum. This is the direct result of decisions being made right now in Washington. Decisions that are fundamentally reshaping what American trade looks like. And the numbers should terrify you. Let me break down what's actually happening because the headlines don't capture the scope. Sources are confirming that Canadian tourism to the United States has dropped by nearly 40% compared to last year. That's not a small dip, that's a collapse. We're talking about an annual loss of up to $5.7 billion to the American economy in tourism spending alone. Think about that for a second. 5.7 billion. That's not monopoly money. That's real revenue that American businesses counted on. Hotels, restaurants, gas stations, souvenir shops, theme parks, all of it just evaporating. Now, what I'm about to show you changes the whole picture. The administration just announced it's raising tariffs on South Korean goods from 15% to 25%. Why? Because South Korea's legislature hasn't moved fast enough to ratify a trade deal. And here's the kicker. This affects everything. Automobiles, pharmaceuticals, lumber, every single product covered under what they're calling reciprocal tariffs. Hyundai and Kia stocks dropped 4% in early trading. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize these companies operate massive manufacturing plants on American soil. They employ American workers. They buy from American suppliers. And now they're doing the math on whether it makes financial sense to keep doing business here. Wait, it gets worse. The president just threatened Canada with a 50% tariff on aircraft. Every single plane manufactured in Canada, Bombardier, de Havilland, even Airbus, facilities that build jets in Canadian plants. And he went a step further. He said he's decertifying all Canadian-built aircraft currently operating in U.S. airspace. There are 150 Bombardier Global Express business jets registered in the United States right now. Corporate jets that companies use to move executives around, private aviation that wealthy Americans rely on, all of it potentially grounded or facing massive new costs. But that's not even the real story. Here's what nobody's talking about. The administration also threatened Canada with a 100% tariff. Let me repeat that. 100% if Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney goes through with a trade agreement with China. Now, this is the part that kept me up last night. A 100% tariff means if a Canadian product costs $100, American companies would have to pay $200 to import it. That's not a trade policy. That's an economic blockade. And it's being threatened against America's largest trading partner, the country we do $3.6 billion worth of business with every single day. Let me give you some context that makes this even crazier. Canada is the top export destination for 36 U.S. states. 36. Nearly 60% of U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada. 85% of electricity imports. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of steel, aluminum, and uranium to the United States. And we're threatening to cut that off with tariffs so high they'd basically kill trade between the countries over a trade deal with China that Canada says is just about reducing existing tariff disputes on agricultural products. What we're learning is that this isn't about trade deficits or national security. Documents reveal that this is about control, about using tariffs as leverage in every single negotiation, about rewriting the rules of how America does business with the entire world. Here's what the latest information shows. Between January and October of last year, passenger vehicle crossings from Canada to the United States dropped by nearly 20% compared to in the same period in 2024. In some states along the border, the decline hit 27%. Maine down 25%, Montana down 19%. Washington State, Seattle is looking at a 27% decrease in Canadian overnight stays. Bellingham businesses reported they've seen Canadian traffic drop so drastically that they can't rely on cross-border customers anymore. I'm curious what you think about this because it raises a fundamental question. When you scare away your biggest customers, when you threaten your most important suppliers, when you make it economically painful for allied countries to do business with you, what exactly is the end game? Does this make America stronger, or does it just make American businesses collateral damage in a trade war nobody asked for? And then this happened while the administration was busy threatening Canada with aircraft tariffs. South Korea woke up to a social media post that sent their government into crisis mode. No official notification, no diplomatic warning, just a Truth Social post announcing tariffs were going up 10 percentage points overnight. Let me walk you through what that actually means on the ground. South Korea's economy grew only 1% last year. That's the weakest performance since COVID brought the world to a standstill. And here's the thing. Exports account for 44% of South Korea's GDP. Nearly half their entire economy depends on selling stuff to other countries, their number one export destination after China, the United States. So when tariffs jump from 15 to 25%, that's not a minor inconvenience. That's an existential threat to their economic model. And South Korean officials scrambling to figure out what just happened. They're not alone. This is becoming a pattern. Now, what I'm about to show you changes everything. Reports are coming in that Korean factories are seriously reconsidering their American investments. We're not talking about cutting back. We're talking about potential abandonment of the U.S. market. Hyundai exported 1.1 million vehicles to the United States in 2024. That's massive scale. Those aren't just cars being shipped over. Those are products built in American plants with American workers using American suppliers. Kia, same story. These companies have invested billions in U.S. manufacturing infrastructure. But here's what nobody's telling you. When tariffs make it too expensive to operate, those investments don't just sit there waiting for better times. Companies look at their balance sheets and make cold calculations. Is it worth staying? Or is it cheaper to write off the losses and redirect production elsewhere? Sources are now confirming that South Korea's trade minister immediately boarded a plane to Washington for emergency talks. The presidential office called urgent meetings. The ruling party announced they'll fast-track the investment bill through Parliament by the end of February. But that's not even the real crisis. The real crisis is what this signals to every other country watching. If the United States can unilaterally raise tariffs by executive order without congressional approval, without warning, based on whether a foreign legislature moves fast enough, what does that mean for anyone trying to do business with America? Here's where it gets legally fascinating and economically dangerous. The administration is using something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose these tariffs. It's a 1977 law designed for actual national emergencies, terrorist organizations, rogue states, immediate threats to national security. It's not designed for trade policy. It's not meant to force countries to sign investment deals faster. But that's how it's being used. And multiple federal courts have already said this is illegal. An appeals court ruled most of these tariffs violate the law. The Supreme Court is currently deciding whether the president even has the authority to do this. Wait, it gets worse. Until the Supreme Court rules the tariffs stay in effect. So even if they're eventually struck down as unconstitutional, American companies and consumers are paying them right now billions of dollars in tariffs that might get refunded eventually if you can navigate years of bureaucratic processes to get your money back. Think about what that means practically. You're a business importing steel from South Korea. You pay a 50% tariff because, yes, steel tariffs are now 50% across the PANSES board. Years later, a court says that tariff was illegal. Congratulations, you can file for a refund. Good luck getting it processed before your business goes bankrupt from the cash flow hit. But that's not even the part that should concern you most. Officials are now saying that threatened retaliatory tariffs from other countries affect $223 billion worth of U.S. exports. That's American farmers who can't sell soybeans, American manufacturers who can't export machinery, American tech, companies facing barriers in foreign markets. The latest information shows China has already imposed retaliatory tariffs on American chicken, pork, beef, and soybeans. Europe is preparing tariffs on $28 billion worth of U.S. goods. Canada implemented $30 billion in counter tariffs and threatened another $125 billion. Now, this is the part that kept me up last night. When you add up all the threatened and imposed tariffs from every country, estimates suggest this will reduce U.S. GDP by 0.7%. That sounds small until you remember that's the entire American economy shrinking. That's jobs disappearing. That's wages stagnating. That's retirement accounts taking hits. Let me give you a specific example of how this plays out in real life. There's a hotel owner in Montana who reported a $38,000 loss after a Canadian sports team canceled a dorm reservation for 70 rooms. Just one cancellation. One team deciding it's not worth crossing the border anymore. Multiply that by thousands of businesses across every border state. Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Washington, Montana, Idaho, North Dakota, Minnesota, Michigan, New York. Every single state that shares a border with Canada is getting crushed. What we're learning is that the political climate and tariff policies are driving this. 70% of businesses surveyed blame Trump's trade, war, and rhetoric for the catastrophic drop in Canadian visitors. Not 30%, not a majority, 70%. Here's what makes this particularly brutal. Canadians aren't just staying home. They're actively boycotting American products and destinations. There's a 4 million member Facebook group dedicated to avoiding U.S. purchases, apps that help Canadians identify and skip American-made goods, provincial governments pulling U.S. wine and spirits off store shelves. Ontario canceled a $100 million contract with Starlink, Nova Scotia, doubled bridge tolls for American commercial vehicles. Northwest territories ordered their liquor commission to stop buying American products entirely. This isn't passive. This is organized economic warfare being waged by consumers who feel betrayed by a country they considered a close ally. Does this change how you see the situation? Because what we're watching isn't just trade policy. It's the systematic destruction of relationships that took generations to build. And I'm not being dramatic. Listen to what business owners are actually saying. A restaurant owner in Vermont had to lay off employees and cut hours. She told congressional investigators, this is long-lasting damage to a relationship, and emotional damage takes time to heal. While people aren't visiting Vermont, they'll be finding new places to visit, making new memories, building new family, traditions, and we will not recapture all of that. That's the real cost, not just the immediate revenue loss. It's the permanent shift in behavior. It's Canadians discovering they prefer vacationing in Costa Rica or Mexico or within Canada itself. It's American. Businesses losing customers they'll never get back. What am I missing here? Let me know, because from where I'm sitting, this looks like economic self-destruction dressed up as strength. Now, here's where things get absolutely wild. While all this economic chaos is unfolding, the administration just announced something that legal experts are calling unprecedented. The president said he's willing to let court orders go, unanswered if judges rule against his tariff policies. Let me be very specific about what that means. The Supreme Court is currently hearing arguments about whether the president can use emergency powers to impose tariffs without congressional approval. If they rule against him, the administration has already warned that reversing the PD tariffs would create a complete mess for businesses. Translation: even if the bottom line, a highest court in the land says these tariffs are illegal, don't expect them to disappear quickly, or maybe at all. But here's what nobody's talking about. This goes way beyond tariffs. Throughout last year, multiple federal judges issued orders telling the administration to stop certain actions. And in case after case, the administration found creative ways to not comply, not through appeals, which would be perfectly legal, through what legal scholars are calling legalistic noncompliance, using technical interpretations to mask the fact that court orders are being ignored. And then this happened. A federal judge ordered the administration to facilitate the return of a man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. The case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court itself said the administration must bring him back. The administration's response, they argued, facilitate doesn't mean actually bringing him back, just making some gestures toward encouraging El Salvador to release him. Legal experts across the political spectrum called that interpretation absurd. As of right now, the man remains in El Salvador. The administration continues to argue it has complied with the Supreme Court's order. Think about that. The Supreme Court issued a direct order, and the executive branch is simply choosing not to follow. Here's where it gets legally fascinating. Chief Justice John Roberts gave a rare public speech where he warned about threats to judicial independence. He specifically mentioned threats to defy lawfully entered judgments. That's the Chief Justice of the United States essentially calling out the president for ignoring court orders. When that happens, you're not in normal political territory anymore. You're in constitutional crisis territory. Wait, it gets worse. Vice President J.D. Vance openly questioned judicial authority on social media posting. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. The president himself said a judge who ruled against him shouldn't, frankly, be allowed to make that kind of decision. These aren't off-the-cuff remarks. They're testing whether the public will accept the idea that presidents can ignore courts they disagree with. Now, what I'm about to show you changes the whole picture. This isn't just about domestic courts and constitutional separation of powers. This is bleeding into international relationships in ways that threaten America's entire trade architecture. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney went to Davos for the World Economic Forum. He gave a speech that was widely seen as a direct rebuke of American policy. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition, Carney said. He urged middle powers to deepen cooperation in the face of coercion and threats. The response from the administration: Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements, that's not diplomacy, that's a threat. And it's being directed at America's closest ally, the country that shares the world's longest undefended border with the United States, the country that's been a military partner through every major conflict since World War II. But that's not even the most alarming part. Sources are now confirming that the administration views Canada-China trade discussions as an existential threat. Any agreement between Ottawa and Beijing that could be used as a drop-off port for Chinese goods to enter the American market would trigger the promised 100% tariff. Here's what makes this so dangerous. Canada is a sovereign nation. It has every right to negotiate trade deals with other countries. That's how international commerce works. But the US is essentially saying, if you make deals we don't like, we'll destroy your economy with tariffs. That's not an alliance. That's a protection racket. The latest information shows that Canada's agreement with China is actually pretty limited. Beijing agreed to lower tariffs on Canadian canola and agricultural products. Canada agreed to allow up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the Canadian market. That's it. No comprehensive free trade agreement. No dramatic shift in economic alignment. But the administration sees it as betrayal and the threatened response. 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods would effectively end trade between the two countries. Let me put this in perspective. US-Canada trade totaled about $800 billion Canadian dollars in the first 9 months of 2024 alone. That's roughly $600 billion US dollars, nearly $3.6 billion worth of goods and services crossing the border every single day. All of that threatened over a relatively minor trade adjustment with China. Documents reveal that this is part of a broader strategy. Use tariffs not just to reduce trade deficits, but as leverage in every negotiation. Force countries to choose between their sovereignty and their economic relationship with the United States. Here's the thing that should terrify you. If this works with Canada, it sets a precedent for every other country. South Korea today, Japan tomorrow, European allies next week. Anyone who makes a trade decision Washington doesn't like becomes a target for economic coercion. Now, this is a part that kept me up last night. What happens when countries decide the American market isn't worth the political submission required to access it? We're already seeing hints. Canada's tourism revenue hit record highs last summer, not from Americans, that dropped from increased domestic tourism and visitors from Europe who specifically cited the political climate in the possible. United States as a reason to vacation in Canada instead. A survey of travelers in the UK, France, and Germany found that 52% said they were more likely to visit Canada due to the current political climate in the US. Over 90% viewed Canada as friendly and safe. That's America's soft power eroding in real time. The perception that the United States is welcoming, stable, predictable, it's disappearing. And once reputation damage sets in, it takes decades to repair. What we're learning is that these policies have costs that go far beyond immediate trade flows. They damage relationships. They create uncertainty. They make long-term planning impossible for businesses that depend on stable trade rules. Am I the only one concerned about this? Because the more I dig into these numbers, the more convinced I become that we're watching something much bigger than a trade dispute. We're watching a fundamental reshaping of how America relates to the rest of the world. And I'm not sure anyone's really thought through where this ends. Here's what's about to happen that changes everything. The Supreme Court is going to rule on these tariff cases probably within the next few months. And however they decide doesn't just affect this administration. It sets precedents that every future president will be able to invoke. Think about what that means. If the court says presidents can impose tariffs by declaring national emergencies without congressional approval, that power doesn't disappear when the current administration leaves office. The next president inherits it and the one after. That constitutional scholars are calling this the most significant expansion of executive power since Watergate, maybe since the Civil War. Because once you establish that emergency powers can be used for routine trade policy, where's the limiting principle? What counts as an emergency? Anything the president decides is an emergency. What requires congressional approval? Nothing. If the president claims national security is at stake, and then this happened, multiple senators, even some Republicans, are starting to push back. They're introducing legislation to reclaim Congress's constitutional authority over trade. The Senate passed a resolution to undo the Canada tariffs. It's rare. It's significant. And it probably won't matter because it doesn't have enough support to override a veto. But here's where it gets really interesting. Reports are coming in that American businesses are starting to feel the pain in ways that might actually change the political calculus. The U.S. Travel Association is forecasting that international tourism spending will decline by $5.7 billion in 2025 compared to last year. They're attributing it almost entirely to the collapse in Canadian visitors. That's real. Businesses losing real money. Hotels, restaurants, attractions, transportation, companies, and they're starting to make noise about it. What we're learning is that the economic pain isn't theoretical anymore. Washington state is facing up to 25,000 job losses if current tariffs stay in place. If the full liberation day tariffs get implemented, estimates suggest 31,900 jobs lost and $2.2 billion in economic damage. Maine's tourism industry got devastated. Vermont, businesses are laying off workers. Montana ski resorts are seeing their worst season in decades. And all of them are being very specific about why is